Hey, you guys. Let's take a look at the most dangerous game, section 2. What I'd like you to do is either follow along with me on the screen or follow along with me in the text through Google Classroom. Also, you can see the paragraphs on the side are numbered for your reference. So section 2 picks up right after Rainsford falls off of the boat into the sea. He struggled up to the surface and tried to cry out, but the wash from the speeding yacht slapped him in the face, and the salt water in his open mouth made him gag and strangle. Desperately, he struck out with strong strokes after the receding lights of the yacht, but he stopped before he had swum 50 feet. A certain cool headedness had come to him. It was not the first time he had been in a tight place. There was a chance that his cries could be heard by someone aboard the yacht, but that chance was slender and grew more slender as the yacht raced on. He wrestled himself out of his clothes and shouted with all his power. The lights of the yacht became faint and ever vanishing fireflies. Then they were blotted out entirely by the night. Now, just a reminder that when this happens, it is the middle of the night. Everyone else has gone to bed on the yacht, and Rainsford stayed back to have a smoke and keep watch, essentially. So everyone is in bed, the yacht is moving forward, and no one can hear him. We have also an example of direct characterization here. In the text, it directly says a certain cool headedness had come to him. So when Rainsford falls into the sea, he's not panicking, he's not stressed, he's not anxious, he's calm, cool, and collected, or cool headed. And so he's able to think logically about what he needs to do, and he decides to take off his clothes because they're weighing him down in the water and they're increasing his risk of drowning. He tries to call after the yacht, but it sails on and no one can hear him. And now he's got to figure out how to survive and how to find land. So let's look at paragraph 2. Rainsford remembered the shots. They had come from the right, and doggedly he swam in that direction, swimming with slow, deliberate strokes, conserving his strength. For a seemingly endless time he fought the sea. He began to count his strokes. He could do possibly 100 more, and then Rainsford heard a sound. It came out of the darkness, a high screaming sound, the sound of an animal in an extremity of anguish and terror. He did not recognize the animal that made the sound. He did not try to. With fresh vitality he swam toward the sound. He heard it again, then it was cut short by another noise, crisp staccato. Pistol shot, muttered Rainsford, swimming on. Now keep in mind, one thing that we already know about Rainsford is the fact that he is an experienced hunter and he is a big game hunter. So the fact that he hears a gunshot and he hears a screaming sound, and the sound is described as that of an animal, but he doesn't recognize it. And so that's an interesting component of the text, the fact that Rainsford is this experienced hunter and he doesn't recognize the sound of the animal screaming and in pain. Paragraph 6. 10 minutes of determined effort brought another sound to his ears, the most welcome he had ever heard, the muttering and growling of the sea breaking on rocky shore. He was almost on the rocks when he saw them. On a night less calm, he would have been shattered against them. With his remaining strength, he dragged himself from the swirling waters. Jagged crags appeared to jut up into the opaqueness. He forced himself upward, hand over hand. Gasping, his hands raw, he reached a flat place at the top. Dense jungle came down to the very edge of the cliffs. What perils that tangle of trees and underbrush might hold for him did not concern Rainsford then. All he knew was that he was safe from his enemy, the sea, and that utter weariness was on him. He flung himself down at the jungle edge and tumbled headlong into the deepest sleep of his life. So here we have a few examples of indirect characterization in regards to Rainsford. This paragraph talks about his determination and his will to survive and to find land so that he doesn't drown. And so it doesn't directly say in the text, Rainsford is determined to survive, but it talks about the great lengths and the efforts that he goes to. We also know that he's in pretty good physical strength in order to swim this far, and he's swimming at nighttime. We also have at the end of this paragraph lots of visual imagery. The jagged crags appeared to jut up into the opaqueness. Gasping, his hands were raw. The dense jungle came to the edge of the cliff, the tangle of trees and underbrush. So we're getting all these images that we can see in our mind of what this island looks like and what Rainsford is experiencing. Let's look at paragraph 7. When he opened his eyes, he knew from the position of the sun that it was late in the afternoon. Sleep had given him new vigor. A sharp hunger was picking at him. He looked about him almost cheerfully. Where there are pistol shots, there are men. Where there are men, there is food, he thought. But what kind of men, he wondered, in so forbidding a place? An unbroken front of snarled and jagged jungle fringed the shore. He saw no sign of a trail through the closely knit web of weeds and trees. It was easier to go along the shore, and Rainsford floundered along by the water. Not far from where he landed, he stopped. So I want to go back to this question that Rainsford asked himself. What kind of men, he wondered, in so forbidding a place? So keep in mind the name of this island is Ship Trap Island. That's the nickname, or that's the only name we have for it. So what type of people would be living on Ship Trap Island when we have all of this sort of creepy imagery going on? An example of that would be here. As he's making his way onto this island, it says he saw no sign of a trail through the closely knit web of weeds and trees. So by using the word web here, I'm almost visualizing like a spider's web. And to me, that makes me think of a trap, right? I'm getting stuck in a spider's web and I can't get out. So these weeds and these trees are acting like a web and they're trapping us in. And again, the name of the island is Ship Trap Island. Paragraph 10. Some wounded thing, by the evidence, a large animal, had thrashed about in the underbrush. The jungle weeds were crushed down and the moss was lacerated. One patch of weeds was stained crimson. A small, glittering object not far away caught Rainsford's eye and he picked it up. It was an empty cartridge. A 22, he remarked. That's odd. It must have been a fairly large animal, too. The hunter had his nerve with him to tackle it with a light gun. It's clear that the brute put up a fight. I suppose the first 3 shots I heard was when the hunter fleshed his quarry and wounded it. The last shot was when he trailed it here and finished it. So we know from section 1 that Rainsford is a very seasoned and expert hunter. And when he comes upon this scene, he's able to sort of put the pieces together and he finds this empty cartridge of a 22. So this is a small gun, and it's used for either hunting, typically for hunting small game or shooting something that's up close. So it seems out of the norm for someone to use this type of weapon to hunt a large animal. And it looks like just by looking at the clues and the way that the jungle weeds are crushed down, from Rainsford's expert eyes, it looks like a large animal was killed. So that tells us that whoever was doing the hunting must have been pretty skilled, not only with using this gun for accuracy, but also for tracking and getting close enough to the prey in order to hit an accurate shot for a large game like this. Paragraph 12. He examined the ground closely and found what he had hoped to find, the print of hunting boots. They pointed along the cliff in the direction he had been going. Eagerly he hurried along, now slipping on a rotten log or a loose stone, but making headway. Night was beginning to settle down on the island. Bleak darkness was blacking out the sea and jungle when Rainsford sighted the lights. He came upon them as he turned a crook in the coastline, and his first thought was that he had come upon a village, for there were many lights. But as he forged along, he saw, to his great astonishment, that all the lights were in one enormous building, a lofty structure with pointed towers plunging upward into the gloom. His eyes made out the shadowy outlines of a palatial chateau. It was set on a high bluff, and on three sides of it cliffs dived down to where the sea licked greedy lips in the shadows. So this is a picture of what a chateau might look like. Chateau is a French word that means country house or castle. So you can see here just in the picture, we're getting an impression of a really large home. It says in the text it's a lofty structure, and it's described with pointed towers plunging upward into the gloom. So we've got a lot of negative imagery here. Gloom. His eyes made out the shadowy outlines. So it seems like this chateau is really sort of gloomy and kind of foreboding. It's intimidating. Paragraph 14. Mirage, thought Rainsford. But it was no mirage, he found, when he opened the tall spiked iron gate. The stone steps were real enough. The massive door with a leering gargoyle for a knocker was real enough. Yet above it all hung an air of unreality. So Rainsford thought that he was stuck on a desert island, right? He thought no one was here. He hasn't come across any living people yet. And this island has a reputation of no one wanting to live here. And yet he stumbles upon this almost castle, essentially. And so it seems really out of place to have this massive, um, possibly luxurious home out in the middle of nowhere with no one around. And I think this is interesting as well, a leering gargoyle. So, so leering generally means unpleasant, and a gargoyle is a stone statue of some type of human-esque or animal-esque face or figure that is next to a wall. Usually they're used to carry water against the wall. Um, if you've seen Beauty and the Beast, the castle has gargoyles and they can be very intimidating. So again, we've got that sort of negative, gloomy, foreboding imagery that comes with this chateau. Paragraph 15. He lifted the knocker and it creaked up stiffly, as if it had never been used before. He let it fall and it startled him with its booming loudness. He thought he heard steps within. The door remained closed. Again, Rainsford lifted the heavy knocker and let it fall. The door opened then, opened as suddenly as if it were on a spring, and Rainsford stood blinking in the river of glaring gold light that poured out. The first thing Rainsford's eyes discerned was the largest man Rainsford had ever seen, a gigantic creature, solidly made and black-bearded to the waist. In his hand the man held a long-barreled revolver, and he was pointing it straight at Rainsford's heart. So I'm sure that when Rainsford approached this house and used the knocker on the door, he probably wasn't expecting to be met with a revolver or a gun pointed straight at him. That's not typically the greeting that we get when we go knock on someone's door. We also have this intimidating figure. We have a new character we don't know a whole lot about yet, except for the fact that he's huge and he is well built, which means he's an intimidating or possibly dangerous figure, especially since he has a revolver or a gun. Definitely dangerous. Out of the snarl of beard, two small eyes regarded Rainsford. Don't be alarmed, said Rainsford, with a smile which he hoped was disarming. I'm no robber. I fell off a yacht. My name is Sandra Rainsford of New York City. The menacing look in the eyes did not change, the revolver pointing as rigidly as if the giant were a statue. He gave no sign that he understood Rainsford's words or that he'd even heard them. He was dressed in uniform, a black uniform trimmed with gray astrakhan. Astrakhan is the curly fur made from the wool of very young lambs. So one thing I want you to keep in mind during this entire exchange that's easy to forget. Do you remember when Rainsford fell off of the boat and he's in the water and he's struggling to survive? During that experience, he was cool-headed and he decided to take off his clothes so that he had a better chance of swimming to shore. He didn't have the weight of his clothes weighing him down. So during this entire exchange, Rainsford is actually naked. Or at best, maybe he kept his underwear on. So he goes up to the door of a house, a castle basically, doesn't know who lives there, knocks on the door, butt naked, and someone answers and points a gun at his heart. And Rainsford doesn't get nervous, doesn't get shocked. He's just kind of cocky and says, "Oh, don't be alarmed. I'm not a robber. I fell off a yacht. My name is Rainsford." Right? He says it very reassured, very confident. And he gives this smile that's supposed to just charm this guy and make him feel like everything is going to be okay and everything's better. But it makes no difference and doesn't change anything. Okay, paragraph 19. "I'm Sandra Rainsford of New York," Rainsford began again. "I fell off a yacht. I am hungry." The man's only answer was to raise his thumb on the hammer of his revolver. Then Rainsford saw the man's free hand go to his forehead in a military salute, and he saw him click his heels together and stand at attention. Another man was coming down the broad marble steps, an erect, slender man in evening clothes. He advanced to Rainsford and held out his hand. In a cultivated voice marked by a slight accent that gave it added precision and deliberateness, he said, "It is a very great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Sandra Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to my home." Automatically, Rainsford shook the man's hand. "I've read your book about hunting snow leopards in Tibet, you see," explained the man. "I am General Zoroff." So I don't know about you guys, but if I landed on a strange island and I went to a strange home and I met a man I'd never seen before in my life, and he knew who I was, that would be a little weird to me. So we do find out something new about Rainsford. Not only we knew before he was an expert hunter, now we know that he has actually written a book about hunting, and it appears that General Zoroff has read that book. So maybe General Zoroff has an interest in hunting. We'll have to continue um, our reading to see if that is true. So it seems like the tone of or the atmosphere of the story has changed a little bit. The man that answered the door seems to have backed down. It seems like he wasn't the owner of the home. Maybe he was some type of servant or something. And now General Zoroff is in charge and has given his approval to welcome Rainsford into his home. So let's take a look at paragraph 24. Rainsford's first impression was that the man was singularly handsome. His second was that there was an original, almost bizarre quality about the general's face. He was a tall man past middle age, for his hair was a vivid white, but his thick eyebrows and pointed military mustache were as black as the night from which Rainsford had come. His eyes, too, were black and very bright. He had high cheekbones, a sharp-cut nose, a spare dark face, the face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. Turning to the giant in uniform, the general made a sign. The giant put away his pistol, saluted, and withdrew. "Ivan is an incredibly strong fellow," remarked the general, "but he has the misfortune to be deaf and dumb. A simple fellow, but, I'm afraid, like all his race, a bit of a savage." "Is he Russian?" "He is a Cossack," said the general, and his smile showed red lips and pointed teeth. "So am I." So the word dumb in here, the phrase deaf and dumb, is not referring to Ivan's intelligence. Back then, it was used to describe someone that was unable to speak. So we don't use that word anymore to describe someone that's unable to talk because it is offensive. It's not politically correct to say someone is deaf and dumb. And so this description here is dating this text a bit. And keep in mind, we learned earlier this week that this was written almost 100 years ago. So that phrase is an outdated phrase that's being used. It's considered offensive today. Something else that's offensive As Zoroff is talking about Ivan, he says, a simple fellow, but I'm afraid, like all his race, a bit of a savage. So, in making a negative generalized comment about an entire race, that is prejudice. That is racist to say that an entire race of people is savage. So, Zoroff is racist here. So we're already starting to maybe get a negative impression of Zoroff. Um, and I think this is interesting. The fact that he's described as having pointed teeth is very interesting. Why are his teeth being commentated on? Like, why are they being described at all? When I think of pointed teeth, I think of like a predator animal with sharp teeth that are ready to rip into a prey. So that's an image that comes to my mind when I read that phrase. Paragraph 28. Come, he said, we shouldn't be chatting here. We can talk later. Now you want clothes, food, rest. You shall have them. This is a most restful spot. Ivan had reappeared, and the general spoke to him with lips that moved but gave forth no sound. Follow Ivan, if you please, Mr. Rainsford, said the general. I was about to have my dinner when you came. I'll wait for you. You'll find that my clothes will fit you, I think. It was to a huge beam-ceilinged bedroom with a canopied bed big enough for 6 men that Rainsford followed the silent giant. Ivan laid out an evening suit, and Rainsford, as he put it on, noticed that it came from a London tailor who ordinarily cut and sewed for none below the rank of duke. So just looking at the clues in the text so far, the fact that this home is described as a chateau or castle-like, and the fact that this bedroom is being described as so luxurious with the canopied bed, which is big enough for 6 men, the suit, the clothes that Rainsford are given are imported all the way from London, England, and they're specifically made for the upper class. That's indicating to us that Zoroff has money. He seems to be rich, and we don't know where that money is coming from yet, but he seems to be pretty well off financially. Paragraph 32. The dining room to which Ivan conducted him was in many ways remarkable. There was a medieval magnificence about it. It suggested a baronial hall of feudal times with its oaken panels, its high ceiling, its vast refectory tables where 20 could sit down to eat. About the hall were mounted heads of many animals: lions, tigers, elephants, moose, bears, larger or more perfect specimens Rainsford had never seen. At the great table the general was sitting, alone. "You'll have a cocktail, Mr. Rainsford," he suggested. The cocktail was surpassingly good, and, Rainsford noted, the table appointments were of the finest: the linen, the crystal, the silver, the china. So at this point, our earlier prediction that Zoroff was interested in hunting because he had read Rainsford's book on hunting seems to be confirmed with all of the animal heads mounted on the walls. And it looks like Zoroff is a big game hunter as well, given the fact that there are elephant, tigers, and lions mounted to his walls. At the very last part, we're getting some indirect characterization about Zoroff and the fact that he is essentially telling Rainsford what to do. He's not asking him, would you please have a cocktail? He's telling him, you will have a cocktail. So he's very bossy and he expects people to do what he says. And we have this final confirmation of how rich and luxurious this home is with all of the beautiful linen and crystal on the table, as well as the magnificence of the home itself. This concludes our reading of section 2 of The Most Dangerous Game.